There we go. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to First Church in Cambridge, Congregational United Church of Christ. We are so thrilled to welcome you all here tonight for a very special evening with New York Times writer Michael Kimmelman, and so that we can all together continue this work of tackling homelessness and hopefully finding some hope amid the challenge. I want to first welcome our honored guest, Michael Kimmelman. Thank you very much for being with us tonight. I welcome all of you and also welcome those who are joining us online. There are many folks who are coming online, and I'd like to also just acknowledge some of the presence of some of our partners who are in the room here tonight. First, City Councilors Mark McGovern and Dennis Carlone. I believe that's who we have so far. I want to thank Shayla Kenyon Bass-Briggs, the Homeless Services Planner for the Cambridge Continuum of Care. Thank you for being with us tonight, Shayla. Thank you to Assistant City Manager for Human Services, Ellen Semenoff, who we know is joining from home, and Liz Mangers, Planning and Development Manager for the Cambridge Continuum of Care. I also want to honor and thank a dear colleague and partner in this work from the Pentecostal Tabernacle Church in Central Square, Bishop Brian Green, the folks from Pentecostal Tabernacle, and so many other communities have participated in our work here with the Friday Cafe. And so I want to invite you all, please, to join us after this talk for light refreshments right through those doors, and also if anybody needs to use a restroom, also right through those doors and to the back of the building. And finally, I would like to just say a word about First Church's homeless ministry. It is one of the real privileges of getting to work at a place like First Church in Cambridge that I get to work with partners. By the way, I'm Dan Smith, Senior Minister of First Church in Cambridge, and it's one of my great privileges to get to work with an amazing group of partners, including Jim Stewart, the Director of First Church Shelter, and Reverend Kate Laser, who many of you know already. She is our Community Minister of Street Outreach and the founder and driving force behind the Friday Cafe, which brings us all here tonight. Thank you very much, Kate. Thank you, Michael, and I will let Kate introduce Michael. Come on up.
Welcome again, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. It really means a lot to our church and to our program to be able to have this time and to grapple with these issues together, because we know what this evening is about, friends. Directly or indirectly, the housing and homelessness crisis has touched us all. Maybe you or someone you care about has experienced the trauma of eviction, or the struggle to buy a home, or the impact of skyrocketing rents. My husband and I live a couple of towns over in Waltham, and our rent has risen by 20% over the past 2 years, while our combined income has lagged way behind. And I'm guessing that there are other people here who can relate to our story. Here in Cambridge, over 500 neighbors are without homes on any given night, and advocates say that the wait list for affordable housing may be as long as 21,000 names. With huge forces in play, the crisis can feel overwhelming. Yet we know our community has the will and the smarts to tackle it. The solutions are here. They're waiting to emerge. So tonight we'll hear about how one major city has taken homelessness on and is actually making a dent. We'll celebrate the many creative and determined people in our own city and state who are working to achieve housing for all, and we'll lift up the work of the Friday Cafe, a community-based program that offers solidarity and support to neighbors on the front lines of the crisis. Our guest this evening has written on many and varied subjects during his long tenure at the New York Times. Formerly the chief art critic, Michael Kimmelman was for a while the author of a column called Abroad, covering cultural and political affairs across Europe and the Middle East. In his current incarnation as the Times architecture critic, Mr. Kimmelman has written about public housing, public space, landscape architecture, community development and equity, infrastructure, and urban design. In the course of his career, he has reported from more than 40 countries and twice been a Pulitzer Prize finalist, most recently in 2018 for his series on climate change and global cities. In March 2014, he was awarded the Brendan Gill Prize for his, quote, insightful candor and continuous scrutiny of New York's architectural environment. Did I mention that he's also a concert pianist? Hear him later, it's good. Mr. Kimmelman's latest project is a Times series called Headway, with the tagline, exploring the world's challenges through the lens of progress. It was his article for Headway about the homeless crisis in Houston that prompted us to ask him to speak tonight, not just because of the subject matter, but because of the way he approached it, honestly, realistically, and compassionately. This attitude, I soon learned, has characterized the whole Headway initiative. When Mr. Kimmelman's team launched Headway, they did it in a very interesting way. They started by taking a critical look back at projects that had been undertaken in the past to address big problems. They asked, well, how did that go? Not until they had carefully analyzed how these past efforts played out over time did the team turn its attention to studying projects underway today. If any of this is wrong, you can correct later. Our world sorely needs that kind of clear-eyed honesty, because good intentions alone won't help us tackle problems like homelessness. We need to start from a place of realism. I'm grateful to Mr. Kimmelman and the Headway team for writing so lucidly, both about the challenges our world faces and the great work that's being undertaken to tackle them. There will be a little time for questions and comments after the talk, so be prepared to add your 2 cents to the conversation. Those of you who are online should have gotten a phone number you can text if you want to join that conversation. And with that, please join me in offering a warm welcome to our distinguished guest, Mr. Michael Kimmelman.
Good evening, and thank you, Kate, so much for those kind words, and I'm very honored and grateful to be here, and thank you all for showing up. I think I better put this back before I knock it over. And Kate, that was exactly right about Headway. I'm going to begin, if I can, not directly with our subject, but with a few questions that we asked when we launched Headway, and I want to see if you have the answers to these questions. So, by a show of hands, I'll give you a few possible answers to each question. What progress do you expect Europe has made in cutting greenhouse gas emissions? So, in 2009, the European Union pledged that its emissions in 2020 would be 20% lower than they were in 1990. Did they meet this goal? I'll give you a few choices. How many think that they surpassed the goal that emissions fell by more than 20%? Just raise your hand. Okay, 5 people. The goal was missed. Emissions fell by 10%. 1 person. Okay, let's try this. The goal was totally miffed. Emissions increased by 5%. Okay, most of you think that. And the answer is the goal was surpassed. Emissions fell by more than 20%. Here's one. What progress do you expect we've made in reducing extreme poverty? So in 1990, 36% of the world's population lived on less than $1.25 a day. UN members pledged in 2000 to cut that percentage in half. What share of the world's population was living in extreme poverty by 2015? Was it 39%, so it went up? 36%? 18%, so they met that goal, or 12%. Okay, so 39%, it went up. Show of hands. Now you're getting scared, I can see. A few of you. Okay, 36%, it stayed the same. A few more. 18%, they met the goal. See where we're going? 12%. Yeah, that's asking too much, right? The answer, 12%. The goal was exceeded. Okay, one more. What progress have we made in getting people clean drinking water? Because in 1990, about 25% of the world's population did not have drinking water from an approved water source like a pipe or well. In 2000, the UN pledged that by 2015, it would cut that in half. 12%, right? What percentage of the world do you think meets that condition today, having clean drinking water? 30, 26, 15, or 7? 30%. It went up. In other words, even fewer people. Show of hands. 1, 2. Okay. 26%. It stayed the same. 1, 2. 15%. Most hands. 7%. Now you're getting the picture, right? Yes, the answer is 7%, and the goal was met 3 years before the deadline. Last one, and we'll move on. What progress do you expect we've made in reducing corporate deforestation? In 2010, the Consumer Goods Forum pledged to help end deforestation by 2020 on behalf of its roughly 400 corporate members. And some companies like Nestle and Carrefour vowed to eliminate deforestation from their supply chains. How many companies do you think succeeded? 350 of the 400 by a show of hands? So a large majority of them. 125? 25? 0. 0. So it's not all good news. Okay, now I'm here to talk about homelessness. Is the national homeless count up or down since 2007? The national homeless count. Is it up? Show of hands. Is it down? It's down. So the homeless count in the U.S. was 650,000 people in 2007. It's 580,000 now, and that is taking into account that the number has been rising since 2016. Now, if you were all professionals in this field, I would be saying we all know those numbers are very complicated and based on pit counts, and I'm not going to go there, but if you want to talk about it later, we can. But as a general number, let's take it as true, because I think it is probably true nationwide, that homelessness has dropped, not gone up. Chronic homelessness fell by 35% between 2007 and 2016. Most, though not all of those gains, have now been lost in the last few years, but the number of homeless families with children has decreased by 27% since 2007, down from 255,000 to 171,000. I don't know if those numbers surprise you, but they sure surprised me. So I am, as Kate said, the architecture critic of the Times, which in my reckoning of the job means in the broadest sense that I write about what we build, the world we are building. And the first column I wrote when I came back from Europe in late 2011 was about an innovative, subsidized housing development in the South Bronx that mixed really kind of interesting, amazing architecture with a combination of Section 8 housing for formerly homeless and first-time co-op owners. And after that, I began to also hear from people about homelessness, and I was noticing how the number of people on the streets seemed to be rising in New York City. And those numbers also seem to be rising in cities like San Francisco and Los Angeles and Seattle, Portland. So when I heard that in fact it had fallen nationally and that homeless advocates were telling me they believed this was a solvable problem, I thought that was news because, well, I saw what I saw in the streets, but also because all I ever read were stories that led me to believe that homelessness was intractable. Clearly, the national numbers told some other story. Maybe this was something I could write, I thought. It wasn't that I wanted to spread good news to make people feel better and worry less. It was partly that I thought all the negative doom-scrolling stories fed into a cycle of pessimism and despair that made people more hostile to the unhoused and more complacent. Without hope, why bother? But also, I was curious, how did the number come down? And where did it come down? And at what cost to whom? Why, I wondered, are we always reading these heartbreaking profiles about people who have fallen into homelessness, or about shopkeepers whose businesses are destroyed by metastasizing encampments next door, or about homeless people who attack somebody on the subway? Horrible stories that make people more hostile, more afraid, and completely dehumanizes a population of people who live with us. And I wonder why it is so rare that we read or have access to in-depth, sort of investigative, accessible stories about what works or might work, or about the obstacles to progress. It seemed to me useful to unpack the problem and lay it out in as clear and precise terms as I could, so as to encourage at least a conversation about what is possible. Starting, I should say, with a conversation about the very definition of homelessness, which is so arcane and mysterious to the public. Yes, you're homeless if you're unsheltered. No, you're not counted if you're couch surfing. What does chronic homelessness even mean? How many people here actually know the definition of chronic homelessness? This isn't meant as a school quiz, but it's a very specific term. Do people here know what chronic homelessness means? It means that you've been homeless, correct me if I'm wrong, it means that you've been homeless for at least a year on the streets, unsheltered, and that you have some physical or mental disability that is demonstrable. I mean, what kind of a cockamamie definition is that? What, are you not homeless if you've been there 9 months? Or you don't have a physical disability? We have many categories and definitions of homelessness which make sense to people in the field, but this kind of inscrutable terminology, I think, confuses and alienates a wider public, and which is, I think, left out of a conversation because we don't share a language, right? We can't discuss the problem. What is rapid rehousing, for instance? What is permanent supportive housing? Does everyone know what that means? So we have a communication problem, and I think we have to begin with that. However we count, though, is it the fact that the homeless number have dropped since 2007 a sign of progress? Look, mostly it's shameful. Hundreds of thousands and probably many, many, many more people remain unhoused in the wealthiest country on the planet and in the wealthiest cities in this country, like this one. Nevertheless, this reduction does tell us that homelessness is not intractable, that while we will never eliminate it entirely because people will always fall into homelessness for a variety of reasons, we can make homelessness rare and brief, to borrow a phrase by Roseanne Haggerty, the housing advocate, and therefore that we cannot give in to the hopelessness or the indifference or the dehumanization that, especially for city dwellers, becomes our armor against the daily sight of suffering and the encounters with people who don't have the access to showers or change of clothes or food or cash or mental health care or a good education or a bed. Yes, we need to gird ourselves to deal with the guilt and the anger and the frustration. You know, I'll just pause to say, one of the things that was very moving and amazing to me in spending a year or more than a year looking at people involved with homelessness and talking to people who are unhoused and so forth in Houston, was to talk to caseworkers there who, often live themselves just on the edge of homelessness and occasionally fall into it and are dealing with their own crises every day and then trying to juggle selflessly, astonishingly, the crises of a couple of dozen other people who need their attention as well. What we face every day as just people walking along the street is really nothing compared to what people who've devoted their lives to doing this involves. But I think the point is that what we can't do is succumb to the excuse that progress is impossible, because that is literally wrong. And to be more precise, the problem is too big for us to solve as individuals or even as individual organizations. It is a systemic problem that demands a systemic approach. And this is where we are failing as a society and a democracy, and not just around homelessness, but around so many big issues like affordable housing, mass transit and infrastructure, education, climate change. By the way, journalism too fails at this. It's very difficult to report on systemic issues. It's much easier to do a story about a shop owner who's being, troubled by an encampment next door, or to sort of wallow in, do poverty porn by portraying people who've fallen into homelessness. It's very difficult to write about systems and what works in systems. But we need to understand them because it is a system in Houston that made the difference and is making the difference. So what we can do is what Houston is doing, which is to get our public officials, medical and service providers, charities, local businesses, landlords, and developers to address the issue collectively and logically. We can get everyone to row in the same direction. That sounds almost absurdly simple, but it isn't happening in most cities. Because the different incentives and financial imperatives for NGOs, government agencies, and corporations in our capitalist system, everyone operates according to their own needs, and therefore in silos, competing for funds, duplicating services, not necessarily sharing information or goals, and as a consequence, housing precious few people. I'm no expert about Boston, but I gather it has more to offer than Houston in the way of services like behavioral health and substance use treatment. It has been moving unsheltered individuals into non-congregate shelter with connections to services, which is great. But unlike Houston, it doesn't have a single comprehensive rehousing system to get people from the streets straight into homes of their own, because the city lacks strong, focused, top-down leadership. And this could be said about New York and Los Angeles and San Francisco and Seattle and Portland, and the list goes on. With the result that various cities' departments compete to house their own people, focusing on their own priorities and metrics of success, which means resources are stretched thin or go to the wrong places, efforts are duplicated, and the problem doesn't get resolved at scale. And it's clear why. Governmentally, politically, culturally, historically, we are a nation of individualists, entrepreneurs, and naysayers. We tell ourselves we are acting in the interests of our community, or to preserve our environment or historic neighborhoods or architecture, or to protect our property rights and values. We call ourselves progressives, but we are NIMBYs. Nobody considers himself a NIMBY because it's a term of opprobrium, because NIMBY is perhaps the most reactionary thing you could be in a society like America today. But a NIMBY is as a NIMBY does. We tell ourselves that this is America, after all, the land of opportunity, which rewards those who work. So we may be individually charitable because we believe charity is a virtue, but we can be wary of, say, providing housing at scale to those without jobs who may also suffer from mental illness or drug addictions and who are now living in shelters or on the street, because there are hardworking people who also need housing and who aren't doing drugs, and they aren't getting a free ride. So let me note here that economists disagree about how to measure the costs to taxpayers of housing people living on the streets. Estimates point to significant savings for the public, from $4,800 to more than $60,000 per year per person in supportive housing. It costs a lot less to house homeless people in real homes than it does to leave them homeless or to leave them in shelters. But homeless advocates contend that even if housing the unhoused is an economic no-brainer that should appeal to conservatives and progressives alike, programs to reduce homelessness should not be measured by whether they save taxpayers money, given that government subsidies are already so heavily, wildly tilted toward homeowners. Homelessness is many things, after all, but it is, first of all, a housing problem, obviously. So I'll just rehearse some numbers you know. The number of severely cost-burdened households, meaning households paying more than 50% of their income on housing, has risen since 2007 by 7% across the country. And in cities like this one, and LA and San Francisco and New York, the story is much, much worse. 5 states now account for 57% of the people experiencing homelessness: California, New York, Florida, Washington, Texas. In New York, rents have risen by 30% since 2015, home prices by 50%. The vacancy rate for apartments renting for less than $1,500 per month, which is the median rent for all renter-occupied housing in New York, is under 1%. For those seeking to rent apartments for under $900 a month, it is lower, less than 1%. And the affordable housing stock is shrinking, not growing. Between 2017 and 2021, New York lost 96,000 units with rents under $1,500 and gained 107,000 units with rents of $2,300 or more. Why? Because we aren't building enough affordable housing. The answer to the problem, which is a universal right to housing, sounds socialistic, I guess, to some people, and it would require a wartime-style construction effort in places where many people believe their neighborhoods are already dense enough that more housing would damage the character of their streets and their community. We've become experts at weaponizing environmental and land use regulations to tie up construction projects. And when a few units get built, we pat ourselves on the back and point to places that are doing even less. We are lying to ourselves. So during the last decade, Houston, which is the nation's 4th most populous city, and possibly its most diverse, moved some 30,000 homeless people directly into apartments and houses. The overwhelming majority of them have remained housed after 2 years. The number of people deemed homeless in the Houston region has been cut by more than 60% since 2011. Sorry, let me get some water. So for homeless veterans, Kate was talking about how long the wait is for housing for homeless veterans in Houston who used to wait 720 days and had to navigate 76 separate bureaucratic steps to get from the street into permanent supportive housing. The wait is now 32 days. Last year, I watched an encampment under a highway overpass in Houston being decommissioned. In other cities, this means just clearing homeless people out, with camp residents left on their own to find someplace else to sleep, preferably in another city. In Houston, the decommissioning is only part of a process that began weeks or months earlier, when city authorities and a team from the Coalition for the Homeless, which oversees Houston's continuum of care, starts talking with camp residents and coordinating with Harris County leaders and local landlords to ensure that everyone in the camp who wants a home will have a one-bedroom apartment of his or her own for a year or longer when the camp is cleared. So the people living in the encampment, in other words, aren't forced into shelters or cited for trespassing, like they are in some Texas cities, or scattered to the winds, but given an actual home. Houston has gotten this far by teaming with county agencies and persuading more than 100 local service providers, corporations, and charitable nonprofits, organizations that previously competed, to pool resources and coordinate responses. Collectively, they've gone all in on housing first, moving the most vulnerable people straight from the streets into apartments, not into shelters, and not requiring those people to wean themselves off drugs or complete a 12-step program or find God or a job. There are addiction recovery and religious conversion programs that succeed in getting people off the street. But housing first involves a different logic. When you're drowning, it doesn't help if your rescuer insists you learn to swim before returning you to shore. You can address your issues once you're on land, or not. Either way, you join the general population of people battling demons behind closed doors. I suspect we all have neighbors with addiction or mental health issues, but we don't consider someone's sobriety or mental state a prerequisite for whether they may live next to us or have a home. And we tend to believe that their challenges, like other private matters, are their own business, not ours. But when someone is homeless, we suddenly see their problems as our business, because that person is living in public, which can also lead us to conclude that the addiction or mental health problem is the root cause of homelessness, even though the inevitable stress and terror of being unhoused can lead anyone to self-medicate or fall into clinical depression or another unhealthy state that registers to passersby as addiction or mental illness. The truth is that 1 in every 14 Americans experiences homelessness at some point in life, a population that is disproportionately Black. Nationwide, most of those who experience homelessness are homeless for only 6 weeks or fewer. 40% have a full-time job, and I assume all of those numbers come to you as surprising as well. They came to me that way. The vast majority find a home on their own. We don't see them once they are no longer on the streets. We only see the unhoused. In Houston, the grinding day-to-day efforts to interview hundreds, thousands of unhoused people, rent them apartments, help them get food stamps, social services, and bus fare, these efforts are easily overshadowed by the sight of a single person sleeping on a sidewalk or beside a busy highway. For this reason, Houston authorities make a point of publicizing when they are clearing an encampment, along with advertising their success in finding apartments for formerly unhoused people, because politically speaking, voters need to understand that the two are happening in tandem. Mostly, voters just want homeless people on the streets to go away. But as the former Houston Mayor Ann Parker put it to me, the homeless guy on your doorstep who spits on you when you leave your house and is always spouting from revelations may seem to you the least sympathetic character in the world, so you may not like the idea of paying to house him, but you can't complain about him being on the street and also complain about our getting him off it. It's okay? We did all this to ourselves, right? Let's remember, it's really not a mystery how we got here. We set the stage half a century ago with the shuttering of psychiatric hospitals in the wake of abuse scandals and the introduction of new psychotropic medications. Essentially, we criminalized mental health and left it up to the police and the criminal justice system to deal with it. That was the worst possible approach for both those who are ill and for law enforcement. Then, cities in the name of urban renewal started offering tax incentives to owners of flop houses to convert their properties into market rate rentals, condos, and co-ops. In New York City alone, more than 100,000 SRO units that had housed substance abusers, elderly singles, former inmates, and the mentally ill were lost. So instantly, those people became homeless. Then you had Reagan-era tax reforms, which encouraged the construction of high-end, single-family homes, but not of affordable multifamily rentals. There were 515,000 multifamily homes built in America in 1985. That number was 140,000 just 5 years later. So as people began competing for fewer and fewer apartments, the affordable housing market turned into essentially a game of musical chairs played by low-income Americans. Someone always lost. Now, in a city like Houston, where housing costs are rising faster than wages, as they are here, evictions are through the roof, and half the population there is rent-burdened. Some 660,000 people in Houston today qualify for just 40,000 vouchers in the city. So it's not true that Houston has made progress only because it has an abundance of cheap, available housing or a lack of zoning regulations. It has all sorts of housing covenants and NIMBY groups and a tightening and increasingly competitive housing market. No, the city has made progress because it made order out of chaos. As former Mayor Parker told me, the bottom line is that nearly everybody in Houston involved in homelessness got together around what works. That's our secret sauce, she said. Let me put it to you this way. Instead of leaving it up to those on the streets, at their most distressed and lowest point in life, to navigate a maze of organizations and shelters and regulations without any sort of help, Houston figured out how to reverse that and essentially steer services to those people in need. My analogy is that, imagine an airport. I just flew here from New York. What would it be like if you were totally distressed and you went to the airport and you had no idea what airline or gate you were flying on? And you had to figure that out, preferably before night fell. And you were just roaming around relatively, aimlessly here and there. Maybe you would land on a place to go. We would not, it'd be unacceptable, it's crazy. You can imagine this is often what it is like for people who are homeless or find themselves facing homelessness to navigate the systems in most cities. I'm droning on, but I'll just say, not slipping backward is now Houston's challenge, because the housing market is getting worse. So Houston recently opened what it calls a navigation center, a way station, basically, where about up to 100 formerly unhoused clients can spend a month or two waiting for their apartments to become available. So it's a kind of de facto shelter, but that's also a way for the city to accumulate some money to give upfront to landlords. So the landlord engagement team for the Continuum, which has now been working for years with landlords to cultivate relationships and build trust, has made sure that its clients are not the ones being evicted. Actually, that's not what's happening in Houston. Those are not the people being evicted. And landlords are being offered incentive fees to take Continuum clients and promised holding fees, essentially the first few months of rent, before subsidies kick in, because if you have Continuum clients competing with people just off the streets who can pay the rent up front, obviously the landlord is going to take the rent up front. So the Houston Downtown Management District, which represents local businesses, has been putting up that money for the time being until Houston can find some other source. So that's further proof that you have a lot of groups working on the same page, businesses, nonprofits. Homelessness is down 5% in Houston this past year, despite these stresses. The city's unsheltered count has dropped by 17%, although its shelter population has gone up. So to Houston's partners in the Continuum, that's a kind of wash. Even so, the city has housed 2,200 people this past year, which I think is a lot. It's a day-to-day grind, and that's the bottom line. There is no magic fix for homelessness. Mark Eichenbaum, the mayor's special assistant for homeless services, told me, housing people is a slow, extremely complicated, incremental process that requires all hands on deck all the time if you don't want to settle for the status quo, much less go backwards. Everyone has to come together around the table. To those who worry that aggressive housing and supportive programs to help the homeless will act like a magnet, drawing homeless people from elsewhere to the community, I just want to say that this is another misperception unsupported by evidence. That's not what's happening in Houston or in California. And like NIMBYism, it really is just an excuse, I think, to do nothing in the guise of saying that success only leads to trouble. In the end, what I learned in Houston is not that the city has solved the homeless problem, because it hasn't, but that in broken America, it is still possible for adversaries to share facts and come together around something contentious and difficult. Public and private, county and city, businesses and nonprofits, conservatives and liberals, the housed and unhoused. In Houston, enough of them agreed on a goal that seems worth striving for, and working in concert, they have made genuine progress in housing previously unhoused people. And as I wrote, the benefits of collaboration have fended off the usual forces of entropy. I'll just say that message clearly resonated with readers, millions of them. The article prompted officials in cities across the country, cities like Denver and New York, to visit Houston. It prompted Houston's business leaders to recruit corporate executives, medical, tech stars, based on the city's coordinated success and commitment to progress. And what we at Headway heard back from the public was that people were just grateful to read about what is possible, not just be told yet again that everything is going haywire, because most of us seek common ground and common cause if we have reason to hope. So let me just say, homelessness is a problem we can solve together. Thanks.
The Friday Cafe would also like to recognize the efforts of local organizers and activists, including A Better Cambridge, which has been pushing our city to confront exclusionary zoning and help create more housing at every level. And the Greater Boston Interfaith Organization, of which First Church is a proud member, which has recently launched a statewide housing justice campaign focused on public housing, on zoning reform, and support for citizens returning after incarceration. We celebrate our city's strong network of community meal programs and nonprofit service providers, groups like the Harvard Square Church's meal program, First Parish, and Faith Kitchen. Faith Lutheran, of course, now homeless itself, following the recent devastating Easter Day fire at their Broadway church. I know that tragedy is on the hearts of many of us here. We are strong believers in the power of community at the Friday Cafe, and so we want to celebrate our partners at the Harvard Square Business Association for their steadfast support, respect, and care for unhoused neighbors. Usually when we think about business owners and unhoused residents, we picture antagonism, but the HSBA has modeled a very different approach, getting to know unhoused residents by name, learning stories, and often quietly offering a helping hand behind the scenes. We are grateful for their vision of a community that makes room for everyone. Here at First Church, my colleague Jim Stewart has not only run the First Church Shelter for 36 years, but has been a tireless activist on behalf of unhoused and marginalized neighbors, most recently partnering with the city, as you heard, during the pandemic to help provide access to daily showers, emergency meals, and critically, increased housing navigation assistance. And it's making a big difference. In our First Church Shelter alone, 9 guests have moved into homes of their own since September. Speaking of pandemic miracles, I wonder how many of you know about the amazing folks at Solutions at Work, including our own First Church member, Alice Kidder, who, on hearing about the city shelters reducing the number of beds during the pandemic, responded that first pandemic winter of 2020 by opening a brand new shelter on Green Street with single rooms instead of adjacent cots. Simply incredible work. And then there are the neighbors who make the Friday Cafe happen. 44 cooks every week preparing dishes for our weekly meal in their own kitchens. 32 in-person volunteers every Friday to cook and serve the meal, distribute material aid, and offer their friendship and solidarity. I can't say enough about the commitment goodwill, humor, creativity, and hard work our volunteers bring to making the cafe happen each week. You all are a band of heroes. We feed about We serve about 100 people every week, not always the same faces, but many coming and going. And by amazing grace, one of our most faithful volunteers over the past year has been a 5-time Emmy award-winning filmmaker by the name of John McGibbon, a member of our dear partner church, Pentecostal Tabernacle. In between helping run our kitchen every Friday, John has created a short video to help us tell our story. It's truly a little gem, a work of art, and I cannot wait for you to see it. Friends, I give you the world premiere of the Friday Cafe video by John McGibbon.
I start my day coming in at between 9 and 9:30, bring donuts, have my coffee, and greet everyone who comes and brings food.
What kind of stuff do people cook?
Anything from cookies to lasagna to pot roast to Chinese.
The Upper L students from Allium Montessori are dropping off what they made for this week. They've been preparing different dishes for Friday Cafe every Friday since the beginning of the calendar year.
Oh, so what did you bring today?
Chocolate banana bread.
Meatloaf today. I made 6 mini meatloafs. I was assigned to do a meat dish, so
What's in your meatloaf?
that's what I... You want details, don't you? Breadcrumbs are in half and no breadcrumbs in the other half. Some onions, some eggs, a spice mix called Slap Your Mama, which means slap her on the back, not slap her in the face, okay?
I had experienced programs in which unhoused folks and housed folks had a chance to get together and mingle and talk and get to know each other. Our senior minister here said to me, well, couldn't we do something like that here at First Church? And it was like a light bulb went off. The first thing that I did was to just walk down to Harvard Square and begin talking to people on the street. People holding signs, people holding cups, or people just hanging out, and saying to folks, what would be helpful? And over again, people said to me, we don't have a place to just go during the day, a place where we're welcome. And I really just felt this huge surge of inspiration, because immediately I could picture it. We could open the doors and let people come in and offer that day space, and then see where it went from there.
Usually there are 3 of us in the kitchen, and we receive the food and we get it ready for our guests. We heat it up, we might mix it up.
I started the very first day. That day we actually had, if I remember correctly, we had 4 guests and 8 volunteers.
We had hot coffee, we had day-old donuts, and then at the last minute we got an offer from a fancy restaurant to provide soup.
That one's even lighter.
Most meal programs cook one meal in the kitchen and everybody eats the same thing, and we have this very unusual model.
So what's going out this afternoon is some beautiful black bean enchiladas.
We invite and ask neighbors to cook food for us in their own kitchens. It's like a giant potluck.
People who make this food spend so much time and they buy so much food. It's just remarkable.
Welcome, everybody. Come on in. Yay! I have no idea how many are going to come through our doors, but I'm guessing probably around 100, which is about average for us. Your tray is going to make its way all the way down the line.
I give it to them and they fill
They
it.
fill it. So it's going to go down
I
the
didn't
line.
understand that. She
It's
put
going to
that
pick
across
up.
the wrong way.
I'm sorry. Sometimes people get nervous because we're jumpy about germs here, and so
Right.
that's probably what's coming through.
That's the COVID thing.
It's in everything. Like, we just are so aware that people who are living on the street are much
I
more
live
vulnerable.
in herd immunity.
Right. Well, but sometimes your immune system can be affected by being on the street, and so we don't want people getting stomach
I'm
flu.
a Navy
and then-
nuke. I've had more vaccinations than you ever want.
Anyway, the point is this. Your thing is going to go down. You're going to pick up side dishes. You're going to pick up soup if you want it, and then they'll hand you your
All right,
tray.
you say it,
okay?
I do it.
All right?
Give it my tray.
We have a huge range of folks. Some folks are recently unhoused and learning to navigate the streets for the first time. Others have been unhoused for years and years. Others have housing but are vulnerable in some way, or elderly, or just food insecure, just don't have enough money to make ends meet.
What's so interesting about the Friday Cafe is they have such a smorgasbord of food. You really feel as though you're going to 10 restaurants at the same time.
I like coming here for the people. I like coming here for the food, the atmosphere. Because when you're a homeless person, it's hard to find all those things.
Everyone says hello to you. Everyone is kind and generous. We love the food here. My wife is over there. She's in a wheelchair. She had a stroke, and one of the parts is to get her out, get her socialized. And so this is a wonderful place for that.
I'm a long-term homeless person. I mean, I'm staying at a warming station right now. Yeah. So a warming station being a place where you don't get a bed, but you're welcome to stay at night. And I'm guaranteed a place there right now until the weather gets a little warmer.
It's a place where people who are low income or homeless can come and have a great meal, a sense of community. It's an oasis in the middle of a crap storm.
Yeah. Do you feel you're feeling old? Are you?
Oh, the leg's a problem.
Oh, everything hurts?
We get donations on a daily basis. So it's women's and men's clothing, shoes, hats, scarves. Sometimes we have sleeping bags and tents and blankets, lots of coats.
So we give out clothing donations to around 40 people every week. We help each person find what they need. It's by donations, so sometimes they don't get everything they need that week, but by the next week or the next couple weeks after that, they can get what they need.
In Cambridge, we have between 500 and 600 homeless residents on any given day. Median income is 3 times the national average, and we have Harvard and MIT, we have high-tech industry. In some ways, it seems like this incredible disjunction between the prosperity of our city and the fact that so many of our residents are really struggling. But one thing about Cambridge that I will say is that the city as a city and neighbors as individuals really care, really make an effort. The huge amount of attention goes to trying to support people and to solve homelessness. The need is definitely increasing. Homelessness is definitely on the rise. The housing crisis in Boston is certainly driving that. Food insecurity is on the rise. Pandemic funding now is going away, and we are going to see more and more and more folks coming to us. Holy God, where you are present, we feel joy. Where you are present, we feel hope. Bless the food that we will serve, bless the hands that have prepared it, and bless every person who comes to us today. In the name of Jesus, who is love on human feet. Amen. Amen. The story of stone soup is a story of a soup that grows. You put a stone into it, and then the villagers add all of their own gifts, like carrots and onions and a little meat. People bring what they have. And at the center, I feel like I'm the stone. I'm the one that the soup kind of coalesces around. But I'm not the soup, I'm just the stone. And what people bring to it is the soup. And it's a beautiful thing to see it happen.